Mike's major initiatives is to try and get the subject of MGM debated within Parliament. So if you'd like to tell us a bit more about that, Mike, I'd be delighted to listen.
Thanks very much.
Good afternoon. I'm Mike Buchanan, leader of the political party Justice for Men and Boys and the Women Who Love Them. The media tend to leave out the subtitle. The party was launched 2.5 years ago. It remains the only multi-issue party in the English-speaking world campaigning for the human rights of men and boys. Our number one campaigning issue is MGM, and it will remain so for the foreseeable future. When I refer to MGM in this talk, I shall be referring solely to the non-therapeutic genital mutilation of male minors, and only within the context of the UK. The title of my talk today is Why Don't Politicians Give a Damn About MGM? I'd like to start though by addressing the wider question of why people in general don't give a damn about MGM. We just have to accept that reality. And it partly explains why politicians don't give a damn, although of course it doesn't excuse it. While MGM is clearly a human rights violation, it's also a symptom of a major problem, of a wider problem. The UK, in common with most countries, is a deeply gynocentric society. A gynocentric society operates with an obsessive concern for the needs and wishes of women and girls, to the point that there is minimal concern over the needs and wishes of men and boys. Indeed, the wishes of women trump the needs of men, as we see very starkly, for example, with the state doing virtually nothing about mothers denying children access to their fathers following family breakdowns, although those women are emotionally abusing both their children and their children's fathers. Denial of access to children is a major driver of male suicide, by the way. Suicide is the number one cause of death of men under 50 in the UK, in all age groups. And of course we know that MGM too is a driver of male suicide, and we learned of yet more tragic cases a little earlier. We see manifestations of gynocentrism in many, many areas, including the criminal justice system. For example, if men were treated as leniently as women by the courts, 5 out of 6 men in British courts, in British prisons today, wouldn't be there. The male prison population would fall from about 80,000 to around 13,000, solving the prison overcrowding crisis at a stroke and saving taxpayers millions of pounds every year. Yet politicians talk of the need to reduce the female prison population of under 4,000, while not expressing the same sentiment about the male prison population of 80,000. I mean, how stark a difference could you get? I recently sent a Freedom of Information request to Michael Gove, the Justice Secretary, and the response was incredible. It just did not strike the Ministry of Justice as an issue of the remotest interest to them that there was this extraordinary imbalance. And you know, the letter can be summed up with, it's not us, Gov, it's the judiciary, they're independent. Absolutely no interest. Earlier I handed out some of our election leaflets which refer to the 20 areas explored in our election manifesto where the human rights of men and boys are assaulted by the actions and inactions of the state, usually to advantage women and girls. There are no areas in the UK today where the human rights of women and girls, specifically as a class, are assaulted by the state. None. Now, who is funding the state, which assaults the human rights of men and boys in 20 areas? Men in the main, ironically, who year after year pay around 72% of the income tax collected in the UK. In the 2012-13 financial year, men paid £69 billion more in income tax than women in the UK. £69,000 million. He who pays the piper is not calling the tune. I'm often asked why we decided to make MGM our number one campaigning issue. It struck us that MGM has at least 9 features which, combined, make it a more winnable battle than most of the battles in our manifesto. Number one, at its heart, it's a very straightforward human rights issue. FGM has been illegal specifically illegal for 30 years in the UK since the Act in 1985. So why the hell is MGM still carried out? Number two, in some of our areas of interest, an end to the assaults on men's human rights would necessarily entail a loss of special privileging of women. That isn't the case with MGM. Women would lose nothing from the ending of MGM. Indeed, many would benefit from having sons who weren't angry at them throughout their lives for having authorised the procedure. And of course, the same goes for fathers. Number 3, the procedure is usually performed on babies or infants who we'd expect to solicit more public sympathy than if the procedure were carried out on adult males capable of giving consent. We saw an interesting echo of this phenomenon just very recently with the public outcry of the drowning of a 3-year-old boy off the coast of Libya. It created a far greater stir than the drowning of thousands of adults, overwhelmingly men, in the last year or two. Number 4, the procedure contravenes UK law, very clearly. It also breaches UN and EU conventions on the right of the child. Number 5, in the not too distant future, MGM may become illegal in one or more Scandinavian countries. I keep hearing talk of Iceland and Finland, but even if it's Iceland, fine, it'll stimulate interest. It should generate mainstream media coverage and raise public awareness about the issue. Number 6, a good deal is known, albeit by too few people, about the physical and mental health problems which can be caused by MGM, and its true historical objective being a reduction in men's pleasure during sex. Number 7, the UK is a broadly secular society today, and if anything, becoming increasingly secular. Few British people today, I think, if they're made aware of the risks of physical and mental harm from MGM, would consider religious or cultural justifications for carrying out the procedure acceptable. Of course, they don't know about the risks, but I think that's not unreasonable to say. Number 8, in the UK, as in all English-speaking countries, the majority of circumcised men aren't Jewish or Muslim. About 18% of men, I understand, of British men are circumcised, but only about 5% of British men are Jewish or Muslim. Number 9, all of the reasons used for justifying MGM could equally well be applied to FGM, ironically, but they never are, showing that this is a deeply gendered issue. But none of those reasons stand up to serious scrutiny, not even hygiene considerations. William Collins is a very important blogger on gender issues, and he wrote an absolutely outstanding piece on MGM, which is something that we refer to all the time, and we include it within FOI challenges and so on. And he had this to say, William Collins had this to say about the hygiene issue. Why is male genital mutilation carried out? It's hygienic. The foreskin can harbour germs. Not heard of soap and water then? The penis is very easy to clean. Easier than, say, cleaning under your fingernails. Aha, I have a great idea. I can solve my fingernail cleaning problems by chopping my fingers off. Doesn't really stand up to scrutiny, does it? The vagina presents a significantly greater challenge as regards hygiene, simply for anatomical reasons. But no one would use this as a justification for female genital mutilation. That would be hateful. Yes, it would. Claims that MGM has medical benefits are merely paper-thin, fallacious, post hoc rationalizations, or bollocks, in short. While there are 9 features which make MGM an attractive campaigning issue in a political sense, we thought 8 features may also make it a tough one. Number 1, very few people are aware that MGM is illegal. I've had people stare at me in utter amazement after I've told them it's been illegal for at least 150 years. The Offences Against a Person Act, 1862, I think, or 1861. So 150 years. But the state never prosecutes for the offence. But people just really struggle to understand how that can be the case. Number 2, very few men are willing to stand up and be counted as having been circumcised and harmed by it. And that's one of the reasons that I really take my hat off to the men, including those associated with 15 Square who do so. But without this reality, we would surely have protests of many, many thousands of very angry men on the streets. That would make it more difficult for the media and politicians to ignore. Number 3, there's a widespread misconception that MGM is harmless at worst and at best beneficial for both men and their partners. Many women say they find circumcised penises more aesthetically pleasing, as if that has any relevance. Imagine the outcry if a man called for FGM to be carried out because he found the results aesthetically pleasing. There'd be an outcry, and quite rightly too. Number 4, because of relentless feminist propaganda, there's another widespread misconception that the damage caused by FGM is of a different order, far worse than that caused by MGM. And also, because of their campaigning, it's believed widely that FGM is carried out for the benefit of men, bizarrely. So the media should cover only FGM. Complete nonsense, of course. There's a spectrum of harm caused by both FGM and MGM, and FGM is carried out by women at the behest of women. The criminal justice system operates to feminist agendas, So it presses on with its futile mission to find and prosecute men responsible for carrying out FGM, although, as I say, it's overwhelmingly women who carried out in other countries and indeed in the UK. There's a lack of awareness, number 5, there's a lack of awareness even among circumcised men that the prime objective of MGM is to reduce men's pleasure during sex and thereby encourage men's fidelity to their wives, as a leading Jewish cleric admitted in his writings in the 12th century. Number 6, we turn to psychology, very important. Many, if not most, circumcised men are in denial about the damage done to them. And of course, that denial can be an important psychological defense mechanism for them. We've seen that denial ourselves in comments on our blogs and pieces on our YouTube channel. Some men are so happy about being circumcised, they're keen that all males share in that experience. Extraordinary. Number 7, the medical profession seems ambivalent on the issue, and of course practitioners, including doctors, are making good money for a straightforward and speedy procedure. 8, last but not least, of course, we have the issue of cultural and religious beliefs, about which I'll be saying a bit more shortly. But I'll focus on politicians now, because only politicians are in a position to make MGM a specifically criminal act, as they have with FGM. In trying to persuade the political class to do that, we immediately hit a major hurdle. We're trying to persuade a class which has shown in so many areas it simply does not give a damn about the human rights of men and boys, in so many areas. I can't recall any politicians, by which I mean both MPs and peers, speaking out publicly against MGM. David Cameron in particular wastes no opportunity to condemn FGM, especially on International Women's Day, while saying precisely nothing about MGM on International Men's Day. With the resources available to anti-MGM organisations, I can't see politicians starting to care about the issue in the foreseeable future, to be frank. But let's imagine a scenario where, miraculously, politicians wake up one morning caring about MGM. Would that make any difference? I doubt it, to be frank. My hunch is that the number one reason that politicians and others are reluctant to tackle MGM is a fear of offending religious communities, notably Jewish and Muslim. MPs would probably lose more votes than they'd gain from calling for MGM to be made a specific criminal offence, especially if they have, of course, sizable populations of Jews or Muslims in their constituencies. They'd be putting themselves at risk of injury and even death, possibly at the hands of religious extremists, or possibly at the hands of others, such as non-religious circumcised men unable or unwilling to come to terms with the damage inflicted on them. This brings me to the sitcom Yes Minister, first screened on BBC television in 1980, the year after Margaret Thatcher came to power for the first time. It was indeed her favourite sitcom, although even her most ardent supporters never included a sense of humour among her many fine qualities. Yes Minister followed the ministerial career of Jim Hacker MP, played by Paul Eddington. His various struggles to enact legislation or introduce departmental changes were invariably opposed by the civil service, in particular by his permanent secretary, Sir Humphrey Appleby, played by Sir Nigel Hawthorne. You may recall the most effective tactic used by Sir Humphrey Appleby to deter Jim Hacker from any proposed course of action was to call it brave. And it would generally bite the dust at that point. So look, let's not expect our politicians to become brave anytime soon. Maybe, though, we can at least expect them to engage with facts and rational arguments of the sort that we were hearing earlier. For example, about the damage caused by MGM. Again, in my view, no, I'm sorry to say. When it comes to men's rights issues, politicians simply will not engage with facts and rational arguments. We see that in most of the 20 areas in our manifesto. As an example of this, let's consider suicide. The number one cause of death of men under 50 in the UK is suicide, in all age ranges reported in government statistics. In 1983, the ratio of male to female suicides in the UK was 1.7 to 1. The ratio rose steadily year after year, and by 2013, 30 years later, it had slightly more than doubled, reaching 3.5 to 1. The government is currently spending a minuscule sum by its standards, £1.5 million, on 5 research studies on suicide. Not one of those studies has a remit to consider suicide as a deeply gendered issue, because 78% of suicide deaths are of men. We'd have to be wildly optimistic to believe politicians might start to care about men who've been damaged by MGM before they'd be concerned about men killing themselves. And again, I return to the point that MGM is a driver in itself of male suicide, sadly. So if politicians don't care about MGM, what about civil servants? Might they be the key to the corridors of power? One civil servant you might very reasonably expect to have a strong interest in MGM is Anne Longfield, OBE, the Children's Commissioner for England. We understand that in Scandinavia, children's commissioners have been at the very forefront of the bid to make MGM illegal. So about 5 weeks ago, we sent a long letter to Anne Longfield and included freedom of information requests asking for two things. Number one, copies of correspondence about MGM from or to her or her predecessor, Maggie Atkinson. Maggie Atkinson started in the post in 2009. We also asked for minutes of meetings at which MGM had been discussed since 2009. 3 days ago, we received her response, and all this is on our website. Her letter was accompanied by 18 pages of correspondence about MGM, dating as far back as 2011. People had written in raising all sorts of issues about the damage caused by MGM. The names of most of the people who'd written were redacted, of course, along with some of the organisations. But people wrote in about physical damage, about mental health damage, ethical issues, and so on. There's a lot of stuff there. One individual civil servant alone, Lynn Foster, had responded to all those communications in that period. I'd like to give you a flavour of that correspondence. In 2012, a researcher and advisor to the Dutch Children's Ombudsman had asked the Children's Commissioner for her expert opinion on MGM, including whether it should be forbidden on minors, discouraged, or left alone. The person added that it was a subject of heated debates around the world, but the Ombudsman had to look at this, the Dutch Ombudsman had to look at the matter from the point of view of the International Convention on the Rights of the Child. Lynn Foster sent a brief reply, and the key section is this. We recognise that this is an issue that has resulted in a very heated debate. However, we have not done any work in this area, and we are not aware that any of the other UK Children's Commissioners have either. Not one bloody meeting in 6 years has the Children's Commissioner, has the matter of MGM been discussed by the Children's Commissioner. So here we have a record of 4 years' correspondence, and what impact did this have? Precisely none. The Children's Commissioner was forced to concede that there were no minutes of any meetings, as I've explained. As an indicator of the level of disinterest taken in MGM by civil servants, I think this really takes some beating. Some have suggested that there might be merit in speaking to politicians in opposition, seeking a commitment that they'll make MGM a specific criminal offence in office. But history tells us this is a fruitless approach when it comes to men's rights. David Cameron was just the latest politician to promise reform on fathers' rights when in opposition, only to renege promptly on the matter once in office. If you got, let's say, Labour saying that they would make MGM illegal if they were in office, they would renege on it the day after the election. It's just it's the pattern. So we're left with the uncomfortable reality that only politicians can make MGM illegal, but they're very unlikely to do so willingly. Civil servants who should be concerned about MGM, such as the Children's Commissioner, clearly aren't. We're left with only a few options, frankly. The first is the law. Along with a number of our party's key people, I shall always be grateful to Patrick Smythe for a recording he made of a presentation given by James Chegwin, a London barrister at the Genital Autonomy Conference at Keele University in 2013. It was an astonishing presentation, just astonishing, and it cleared up what for us had been really some confusing legal stuff. For those of you unfamiliar with it, with that presentation, which we've taken notes of, as well as have the thing on our website. He spelt out in forensic detail that while MGM isn't specifically illegal under UK law, it's clearly an example of physical injury carried out on minors who by definition aren't in a position to give consent. MGM is therefore, without question, a criminal offence. In previous cases of physical harm caused to minors on religious or cultural grounds, such as the facial scarification of minors by parents of African origin, justification on religious and cultural grounds were deemed utterly inadmissible. They carry no weight. Chegwin pointed to a number of quite appalling comments made by judges in MGM-related cases. In fact, he referred to one I remember as the worst decision made by a judge in a British court in the 20th century. But it's there, and people, people refer to it. He also explained in detail, again, great detail, how MGM is clearly in breach of UN and EU conventions on the rights of the child. The rights of the child. Chegwidden was, however, concerned that a test case on MGM in the UK might lead to the scenario which happened in Germany. MGM, I think somebody mentioned Cologne earlier on, MGM was basically sort of declared, I don't know if declared illegal would be quite the right term, but anyway, a judgment was made in Cologne. But the German federal government, I guess, then brought about or introduced religious exemptions. So it was a spectacular sort of shot in the foot, I guess, in a sense. We've thought long and hard about this, and our view is that such an about turn or such a judgment by the government would be highly unlikely to happen in the UK for quite a variety of reasons. And even if it did happen, we doubt any more procedures would be carried out than are carried out currently. In our view, a test case is a risk well worth taking, and we're currently working on an extremely promising case, along with a number of long-term MGM campaigners, including a couple in this room. Sadly, I've had legal advice not to talk about that case in public, but we'll post details on our website as and when we can. Now, after explaining that he was reluctant personally to support a case for fear of the German experience being repeated here, Chegwidden said this: "What I would prefer to do is wait until the social awareness is good enough for a judge to feel strong enough to say the law is clear and this is what it is. The law is not good about bringing about social reform. It is very good at consolidating a social reform that has already got underway. Law didn't bring about gay marriage. All that came about through social activists. Once there was a sufficient tide of opinion, the law decided to get on board." End of quotation. I think Chegwidden's hope of a strong increase in social awareness on MGM betrays a lack of understanding of gender politics, quite frankly. In my view, there will never come a time when there will be what he termed a sufficient tide of opinion. I'm sorry to say, but I think we need to be as honest as we can. In campaigning terms, anyway, it would be healthy to assume that will never happen, rather than cling to the fantasy that one day it might. Our party is going to do what it can to support people with potentially strong legal cases, whether with respect to parental consent or otherwise. We're starting to engage with personal injury law firms with the objective of mounting a class action, and hopefully we'll have something to say about that before too long. Beyond the law, what options are left available for MGM campaigners? Well, one is a political option, which currently there's only one in the UK, which means supporting us. The only party in the UK, in fact the world, campaigning on the issue. Campaigners on individual men's rights issues rarely recognise that they're fighting battles in the same anti-male war as campaigners for other men's rights. And to take one obvious example, male victims of domestic violence, of whom there are a great number, are as reluctant to speak publicly about their experiences as victims of MGM. So we're getting support from many quarters because we look at 20 areas. And we have plenty of female supporters as well as male supporters, to the surprise of some. We've had over 100 appearances on mainstream radio and TV since we launched 2.5 years ago, far more than any other organisation in the world fighting for men's rights. There have been countless articles written about us in newspapers and magazines, both in print editions and online. And just 2 days ago, I was interviewed on Sky News about the case of the 27-year-old female barrister who'd humiliated Charlotte Proudman, I think, who'd humiliated a 57-year-old lawyer over his compliments on her photograph on her LinkedIn website, LinkedIn profile. I managed to, so I was on Sky News. I managed to say a fair bit about MGM at the end of the piece, and I generally try to shoehorn in a mention of MGM wherever possible. I managed it with Philip Schofield on ITV's This Morning some months ago. His face was something to behold, I can tell you. He was just like, what? I haven't been invited back on that programme. I don't know why, but there we go. We're very active in publicly challenging senior politicians and others in positions of influence, often with the support of freedom of information requests. In the case of MGM, I've already mentioned the Children's Commissioner for England. We've recently challenged Alison Saunders, the Director of Public Prosecutions and Head of the Crown Prosecution Service. The CPS was forced to admit that there are no legal grounds on which MGM might be performed, although of course their response was couched in the most appalling weasel words, but it's very obvious that they're holding their hands up. We recently challenged Theresa May, the Home Secretary, over why the police do not bring prosecutions in relation to MGM. It's clearly illegal. Why are you not prosecuting? It's really bloody simple question. I look forward to the response. I expect that the response will not be simple, but that's due in the next, I think, week or two. Our party's long-term strategy is to challenge the party or parties in power because only they can introduce or amend legislation. Success won't be measured by our candidates being elected as MPs. The bar is far, far lower. Success will be measured by some of our candidates demonstrably contributing to MPs not being re-elected. The vagaries of the first-past-the-post electoral system force us to adopt this approach. It's the only viable approach that we can see. As an example of just how perverse the electoral system is, at the last general election, the SNP landed 65 MPs with around 2.5 million votes, while UKIP had almost 4 million votes and landed only 1 MP. While my party had almost 4 million votes fewer than UKIP, we landed only 1 fewer MP. I laughed out loud. I enjoyed that when someone came up with that. Victory, our victory at the election. So, yes. So we're planning to challenge the Conservatives' 20 most marginal seats at the next general election, and we already have in place income streams to fund all 20 of the £500 deposits. We believe that with this number of candidates challenging Conservative marginal seats, there will be a tangible possibility of denying the Conservatives victory. The mainstream media will then have no choice but to give us coverage, and therefore our 20 areas, notably MGM. We've started building a war chest to maximise our impact in 2020, and I would ask everyone here today to at least consider making a donation or becoming a party member. Membership costs from only £5 a month or 16 pence a day. Nobody connected with the party makes any income from donations or party memberships. We never have. And I haven't asked for a speaker's fee today. If you can't support us financially, or even if you can, maybe you could help us in other ways. Please feel free to contact me with any suggestions at any time. Call me, email me, whatever. We want to work in the coming years with your organisation, as well as your organisation's supporters, in a bid to consign MGM, a grotesque human rights violation, to the dustbin of history. Thank you very much.